Hello there, everybody. Welcome back to Star Wars Lads. We are back for our weekly live stream news and Q&A video. So hopefully you're all enjoying this chat and joining us on this Tuesday, May 21st, for all the latest in the world of Star Wars news, as well as any other discussions you guys would like to talk about. As always, this is live Q&A. Send those questions in. Let us know what you're thinking about today. Could be about anything. Doesn't have to be about Star Wars. Doesn't have to be about the topics, but we're going to run down a series of topics here from the latest and greatest in Star Wars news, including, and probably most excitingly, the Skeleton Crew leak, which is from a product. We have our first, I guess, kind of official, not really a real drop, but it's from an official product of the Skeleton Crew kids, what they actually look like. And so we'll be talking about Skeleton Crew. Finally, some information and some looks at that project, which was originally supposed to come out last year. So we're finally getting some Skeleton Crew. And then we're going to talk about the Warhammer 40K studio creative assembly, who is going to be possibly making a Star Wars game. We'll be talking about that as well as so much Acolyte content. This is a huge 2 weeks for the Acolyte. We're starting to really ramp up. Everybody is starting to get excited, and Disney's really in full force on their marketing for Acolyte. So we've gotten a lot of Acolyte news, including getting a first glimpse at Vernestra Rwoh's Lightwhip. So we're excited to talk about all that, as well as a variety of other topics. Make sure you like the video. Helps us out tremendously with the channel. If you're watching on replay, like the video, subscribe to the channel, come back every Tuesday for these streams. We will only have one more of these streams, barring, major news drop, which if major news drops out of nowhere, like a, announcement of a new series or movie or game or something, we'll do a kind of an emergency live stream that day, that night, depending on when that happens. But if nothing else happens between now and the Acolyte, which it would probably be kind of surprising if they announced something big before a new Star Wars show came out, this will be our second to last stream. Next week will be our last stream before we start doing weekly Acolyte streams. And it's been pretty much confirmed that the Acolyte is dropping that same Ahsoka schedule, Tuesday night, 6 p.m. So we'll start to do that live immediately after the episodes drop, like we did for our Ahsoka coverage. So Tuesdays will still be the days. The focus will just shift from news to Acolyte. But again, if there are some breaking news stories during the Acolyte, we will be doing live streams and covering all that as well. So stay tuned and enjoy these streams as they continue to go on. So again, send in your comments, your questions, anything you would like to talk about, your theories, send them into the chat, and we will get to them as soon as we can. It can be about the topics we're going to discuss. It can be about anything Star Wars related, anything in the world of movie news, pop culture, whatever you want to talk about. It could be anything. Let us know in the chat, and we will answer it as soon as we can. But to start off, let's run down with the first topic here, Senek. Skeleton Crew. We finally have some information about Skeleton Crew. Not really information, I guess, per se.
Yeah.
We have a leak about Skeleton Crew, and it is this image from the kids. We have on our thumbnail here. You get to see what the kids from the show are going to look like, and it is exciting to get not just an alien kid. Finally we get some animatronic alien as like a main character. That's going to be really cool. But also, I like that each of the human kids are have a kind of a different design, different look to them. There's a Star Warsy feel about them. They have a very, they're not just standard like Tatooine farm boy looking kids. They have a bit of a different design to them. So I think that's pretty cool. What was your thoughts here after seeing the main cast of kids here from Skeleton Crew?
Well, I'm just glad that it's finally alive, right? It doesn't. It feels like after that delay from the end of last year to, I'm assuming sometime after August, I was like, all right, a full year, will fly by. People will start talking about it. Things will start coming out because when you have all these media pushes and merchandise pushes, some things just have to kind of be set to their schedule a little earlier or something. But it's been quiet. It has not had anything going on. So finally seeing something, even if it's just like an ingot, it's like, okay, like I'm not really upset by that. I'm glad that we have like a true leak finally from the show. This is like our first real look at how these characters will be like, unless you've been able to see the celebration trailers that have been like sneaking up online. Yeah, I mean, I don't remember the name of Max Rebo's. It's Utalon or something. His
Yeah,
blue
or
species,
Tolan.
or Tolan. Yes. So it's interesting because it looks like one of the kids is definitely confirmed to be that species, or almost like a subspecies, because he seems to have four appendages as opposed to having
Right.
two like Max. So I know there's gonna be some people immediately being like, "Oh man, you've lost like some of the alien charm of that." But we've had like subspecies like this, like the hammerhead species, the Dorians, right, had their own subspecies. We've seen other species in Star Wars had their own slightly different looks, like the Trandoshans, famously with the Mandalorian, right? People are like, they don't look like the Trandoshans of the movies and stuff and like animation, but it's like, nope, it's like a subspecies or like a different clan or crew,
Right.
whatever. So I'm not upset by that. I think forcing a kid or a small person to perform with their legs or something would be a little harder, especially when like you're with kids. Obviously you're running around doing some crazy hijinks across the galaxy. I think two appendages would not be the most ideal in this situation. So if this is an offshoot, or if they're making Max even more special by being like, no, 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 like it's just him and his crew who are like this, I'm fine either way. I know there was that little bit of a conversation online that one of the kids has like that visor over their face. They're like, is it a mirror lock-in? And it's like, it's not, because if you've seen the celebration trailer, they put down the visor. So just another human and two other kids. Not too surprising. I'm glad that at least that our we have an alien in the main cast finally. That's not necessarily humanoid. That
Yeah.
certainly helps. I would have almost preferred like one more, or at least a little bit more of like a Twi'lek or some other human subspecies or offshoot to replace like one of the kid designs. But besides that, I think it looks pretty good. I'm sure they're gonna meet up with some crazy characters. But the art itself on the ingot, I feel like we got our first clue at what that skeleton crew might be. It seems like it might be these robot mechanical beasts. There's some actual like skeletons, some skulls on the ingot.
Mm.
I'm very curious if it's like those two things are related, or they just happen to like come upon a ship that has a bunch of skulls because of these like skeleton like robots like killing everyone or something. I don't know.
Right.
It's Goonies in space. I'm very curious if these robots are even like pirates per se. It'll be very interesting how it'll play out. But I'm just glad that we finally have an idea of like what this show looks like, and this at least will fuel us for at least a month while we're busy with the Acolyte, busy with High Republic
Mhm.
stuff, kind of dominating the airwaves.
Yeah, and hopefully we could get like maybe a little teaser or something at some point towards the end of the run for Acolyte. If especially if the Acolyte is a big success, I feel like they will start to plug this show because this is arguably the biggest risk year for Disney Plus Star Wars TV so far. You have two properties with the Acolyte and Skeleton Crew that have nothing really to bank on outside of really the Acolyte has more with the iconography of the High Republic, which does have a built-in fan base, but it's obviously not a fan base that transcends to the general public. So these shows have a lot of marketing to do. I think they've already done a lot more for Acolyte than we've seen them do for most Star Wars shows. Like even Mandalorian season 3, there wasn't that much compared to what I've seen from Acolyte. So I think Skeleton Crew will start to ramp up, but they need to pick and choose when to capitalize on certain moments to really plug Skeleton Crew. And this is an exciting look. Again, yeah, I mean, I'm with you. I kind of was I feel like by changing the species or, having a subset of a species of the Ortolan, it makes it a little less special that it's like the Max Rebo species. Really, they could have gone with a different species. Not that I'm not complaining per se. It's just like, it basically is a new species, right? Because you're having a very different version of what we've seen before. But I do like the design. It's very, Muppets and kind of Alf-esque in my opinion. Like I see kind of that Alf design a little bit. You get a little bit of Jim Henson in that design. So I don't know. I think it's going to be cool to have this character in there. Kind of could replace maybe what would usually be a role reserved for a droid type character, maybe some comic relief, or able to do things that the main human characters can't normally do. So I think that's going to be a lot of fun. And this show is something that I still am not super hyped for, but I could get more hyped. More I'm seeing from it, the more excited I'm starting to slowly get, but it is still certainly a lower tier of excitement than I was for Acolyte or for, all the other Star Wars shows that have come out because it's been so secretive, right? It's like you said, Goonies in space. There's a lot of comparisons, Stranger Things and typical like 80s Spielberg-esque type films, Donner-esque films. And so that's interesting, but if it's just that gimmick with the Star Wars, skin, it doesn't really appeal to me that much. So I want to see and continue to see how much this is going to be that type of story, but with a really traditional Star Wars spin, something that really enhances the world, gives us another look at the world from a perspective that we don't normally see. What makes this show need to exist besides just capitalizing on 80s nostalgia movies or the wave of 80s nostalgia. So I'm hoping we get to see a lot more soon because this is a promising start, obviously just packaging, but it's a promising start so far. And it is making me a little bit more excited for the end of the year when we finally get this. To the comments, though, you guys are talking about it in the chat about Skeleton Crew. And again, if you're joining us and watching, let us know what you think of Skeleton Crew and what you thought of the ingot and reveal of these characters' first look, a first kind of leak out there. We have SFW who says, "Do you like potatoes?" Yes, potatoes. I love potatoes. Yeah, I mean, I like French fries and stuff. Yeah,
Yeah, can't really add anything there, they're nutritious part of the diet, and you can make them work in any dish almost.
true. Yeah, lots of different ways you can use them. As Samwise Gamgee always says, that's my philosophy for potatoes. Trent says, "What up, fellas? I'm having trouble getting excited for Skeleton Crew." Yeah, that's fair, Trent. I've kind of been on the same page. We need to see more. It's been one of those shows that just kind of got randomly announced when we were at Celebration 2 years ago in 2022, and now we still have barely seen anything from it. So
Yeah.
I think the more and more they show, the more excited we can all get. But as a concept, it was one when they announced it that I was like, I don't know if we need that.
Right, like, I would be much more open to trading this show without having seen it, of course. Just conceptually, from what we know details wise, I would have traded it for another season of Book of Boba Fett. Be able
Hmm.
to like bring in a little bit more into the underworld instead of being isolated on Tatooine and having a little bit of an identity crisis there, and then having his shows basically hijacked, and then as a result, also making a lot of the season 3 twist of Grogu being back feel like it's earned and deserved. It's not. And when we were there, they were saying like this is going to be like important to a degree to the overall Mandoverse story being told, which I'm not opposed to, because if this is going to lean more into Stranger Things than necessarily Goonies, I think that's fine, because there are some very dark things about Stranger Things. There are some really difficult choices. It just happens to be that the kids in this show feel a little bit younger, and I'm a little worried about how they can like make Stranger Things happen with these characters, because nobody tried to make Stranger Things happen. It was supposed to be originally an anthology show. It's supposed to be just something that Netflix put out there that is like, oh yeah, inspired by the 80s, but with a little bit more modern sensibility, a little bit more mature storytelling. And then we'll go into another like show that's branching off, or like another conspiracy or something like that. It blew up. Like, I know people were talking about it. It is like Netflix's biggest show because it was like such a grassroots show and such incredible talent that signed on, not even expecting it to become this thing. And then the kids, obviously being around this talent, have grown and had some very strong careers out of it. I don't think Disney necessarily will be able to hit that same level, because it's being manufactured. So I feel a little bit of that fear for sure. But being connected to that Mandoverse storyline does definitely raise my interest because I'm like, okay, you have to at least give like a piece of the puzzle. Like maybe there's something about this treasure or whatever is going to be the MacGuffin or something of this show is something that maybe Thrawn and the heroes both want. Maybe the skeleton crew are in a way replacing the Dark Force Rising of the Heir to the Empire adaptation, that we finally can see like a different group or some crew or technology that is going to be able to shift the tide almost immediately. I'd love to see something like that coming out of the show. I don't necessarily need to see or believe these kids will play a role with Grogu or Din Djarin or Ahsoka, but whatever they discover or bring into the story, it definitely can. And I think another thing that I'm very excited for is supposedly it has one of the highest budgets of these shows because it's very, very focused on like the creature design, costume design. Like there should be so many aliens in this show. And we've already seen like some of that investment already starting to show up in some of the Acolyte previews. If we can just have like a whole scene where it's just like one human and like 10 aliens, that would make my dream. Because that almost feels like an MMO or a Star Wars video game or a book where that's more of the balance of the galaxy, especially in the Outer Rim, as opposed to what we're seeing in the Outer Rim here in live action Disney Plus shows. Like, oh, great, there's like we're on Tatooine, we've seen all these aliens, but then you end up seeing like 18 humans and one alien, right? I want to see a little bit more of that balance, and if that show at least is a good investment, so that you can start having a little bit more of these awesome creature designs, new and stuff from prequels, original, and sequel trilogy start showing up more and more. I
Mhm.
think it can turn into something pretty solid.
No, absolutely. And I think this could be a surprise hit. I really do. I think this could be the type of show, like you were kind of mentioning with Stranger Things coming out of nowhere. This could be that type of show that really gets another age group of fans onto Star Wars, kind of like Andor did for a little bit older fans. I think fans that were interested in something a little more mature, a little bit more out there and different than the normal Star Wars formula. I think this show is going to kind of go for that opposite tone in a little bit younger direction, right? It's something that's going to be really different. And when it eventually comes out, I could see this being a huge sleeper hit, like something we're not really looking forward to that much, and it ends up blowing us away. I feel like that's kind of the bonus that Andor and Skeleton Crew both had. Is I feel like overall excitement for both of those shows have been very low, and I think that sets you up to be a little bit more interested and enthused about it when it does come out, because something like Obi-Wan, hard to live up to the expectations of that.
Yeah.
Something like Mandalorian season 2 and 3, hard to live up to the expectation of that. If we look at just Mandalorian season 1 when nobody knew what it was, and then Andor and now this show, I do think expectations are low enough to where this could come out and be a surprise sleeper hit, especially when you have younger characters and alien characters. It could be a huge merchandising thing for Disney as well. If it becomes a major hit, this could be, another side of Star Wars that you see really start to expand. So we'll see what happens with Skeleton Crew, and we'll be tracking it, obviously covering it on the channel when it eventually comes out. Skywalker's Academy says, I never think of Ithorians, but we see them a lot in shows. Skeleton Crew is supposed to just be a fun show. Kids will probably love it, but there is, or at least was, no real danger. Maybe they put something in there or edited it differently. Well, we'll see what they do. It does. They have been very open about the fact that this ties into the 9 ABY timeline for Star Wars, with Ahsoka and Mandalorian and Boba Fett. And I do think at some point we're going to see some iconography that ties into those shows just so they can put it in the trailers and stuff and get people to watch it. So I think it might be given that kind of elevated importance, more so than we might have originally thought when this was originally announced. Because when they announced it, it really was just kind of like, hey, it's this Mandalorian spinoff called Skeleton Crew. And I kind of, wish it stays that way. Like, I'd love this to be its own little small piece that everything doesn't have to always connect. But I do think with the Mandalorian now being turned into a film, Disney and Andor also ending after season 2, Disney's kind of looking for what is that next flagship show we can sell Disney Plus on, because Mandalorian's really only been it for Star Wars. And so if Ahsoka, season 2 really hits home, I think Ahsoka did well enough to where they can kind of bank on a solid amount of people still watching it, and it's going to be important no matter what. So people are going to watch it even if they hate the show. With Skeleton Crew, this could be their chance to really make a stamp and be like, this is another solid IP that we have in the Star Wars universe that now we can bank on people returning every year, every other year to watch more of this. And so, maybe they have retooled some things behind the scenes. That's why it's been ultimately delayed a little over a year, because originally the rumors I remember last year were like late summer Skeleton Crew, and then it ended up not coming out last year, not even having an official release date this year, but it's supposed to be fall, so we'll see.
Yeah, maybe the true crossover was this and Jedi Survivor being so close to each other. But yeah, no, I'm gonna stay excited for it because, like you said, without Mando now being elevated to that film status, you do need to have a new show. And as much as Andor is critically acclaimed, it is not classic Star Wars for a lot of people. I think this will be a little bit more of that Saturday morning cartoon vibe that's almost been
Mhm.
missing a little bit since, I would say, like maybe midway through Mando season 2. Everything needs to kind of go back to lower stakes in a way while you still let these characters grow and evolve. And if you can place it on the kids to grow and then maybe become bigger characters 10 years into the timeline or something, people will be like, "Oh, this is such a great origin story for them," and then how they like grew into these, not incredibly important characters. Maybe they are, we don't know yet, but characters that we can follow for a long time and like grow and love and appreciate.
Absolutely. Travis says, "How's it going, guys? That one elephant guy legit looks like a Heffalump from Winnie the Pooh." I could see that. Also says, "After I saw the ingot, I had a dream where the elephant clogged the toilet and Jude Law had to fix it, and I woke up." I would be relieved that's not the show too, Travis. Um, Colton says, "Vane from season 3 of Mando and his pirates are the enemy of Skeleton Crew in this season via making Star Wars. They are wonderful." Yeah, I enjoyed their appearances as well. I mean, honestly, that was kind of the stuff that lived up to the hype a bit more in season
Yeah.
3 of Mando for me than anything. That was a great episode where they fight them, and I thought the visuals around them and their ships and the CGI around the effects and the costuming was all excellent. So hopefully, we get some more cool appearances from all those characters.
Yeah, and I mean Gorian Shard is such a cool name and design. It's like Swamp Thing in space almost,
Mhm.
and it's very Jim Henson, especially like earlier career Jim Henson. So having Vane back, especially since he's like, I'm just gonna dip out here. I'm not trying to die, and possibly also having Gorian survive and show up, that'd be really cool. But I'm assuming it'll just be Vane. Um, and I think as a villain, right, when you have Grief Karga, Din Djarin, Grogu, IG, right, like they're Bo-Katan, right, and all these Mandalorians, they're not gonna seem impressive, but it's like power scaling in the universe for a bunch of kids facing off with these pirates. Yeah, that I feel like that would be pretty terrifying, especially since they weren't like bad. They were just simply outmatched by a dude in like a souped up fighter jet, right? And this is a guy who's been trained from birth, like warfare essentially. So yeah, I assume that these kids are a little bit more on like the nerdier side, a little bit more on like the casual, like my life is not in constant conflict. It is the early New Republic after all, and
Mhm.
then once you get thrust into it, yeah, of course a pirate's going to be terrifying to you, especially a pirate with technology, a pirate that's been scorned and is looking for like an easy win here and there.
Uh, Travis Mitchell says, "From what I understand, the idea of the show existed in 2018, being about the kids from The Last Jedi, but it changed with time." And also said Gorian Shard felt straight out of the sequel trilogy, which is a good thing. I don't know. I don't remember ever hearing that. Cynic, do you remember ever hearing that? I know there were a lot of speculation about Broom Boy and what was next for those kids, but I don't remember
Yeah,
hearing there was a show in development.
I I don't think I ever heard anything about that. I could see that. I mean, there was 3 or 4 characters there from the Last Jedi.
Hmm.
I think the question though is if it was gonna be originally about them, right? Then you had the whole question of like, okay, the broom boy can use the force, and All these characters are now a little bit more powered up, right? I think the appeal of Skeleton Crew, from what we've seen so far, is the kids are as normal as can be in a Star Wars setting. That's what's going to be terrifying, putting them into this life-changing situation. That's so. You might be right, Travis. We haven't heard anything about that, but I definitely agree. Gorian Shard does look like a very sequel trilogy era character. He would fit right in for sure with maybe not the Canto Bite crowd, but definitely Takodana Castle.
Right. Yeah. The only rumor about a Force user in this series is supposed to be Jude Law. So we'll see what happens from there. But yeah, that's going to take us to our second story of the day. So if you have more thoughts on Skeleton Crew, we'll get to them a little later in the stream. Make sure you send them into the chat and we will answer them as soon as we can. If you'd like to send in a super chat, support the channel, and get your chat sent to the top, feel free to do so. We always greatly appreciate the support. And thanks for all your comments here for the Skeleton Crew part of the stream. But to move on to the next thing, we have a rumor out that Total War developer Creative Assembly are reportedly working on a Star Wars game after the Warhammer 40K game they are working on, which is pretty exciting for a lot of people who are big Warhammer fans. Personally, never played a Warhammer game. Basically, know nothing about the universe. Always heard amazing things. Big fan of Henry Cavill, especially because I love the Witcher books and games. And so his passion for Warhammer has always made me want to get into it. I know it's a universe I would really enjoy. It does seem like a massive undertaking to get into, but I've always heard incredible things. And so as an outsider, I feel like this is a good thing because, I mean, just in general, right? Warhammer, the games involved with Warhammer, one, the game that this company has been working on is an RTS. We haven't had a great Star Wars RTS or any Star Wars RTS since Empire at War, which would be amazing to get a new one. I think that's a genre that works perfectly for Star Wars. It's just absolutely perfect. It's the way we've gotten these Battlefront games over the years. That's the same way you could do an RTS with Star Wars. Give you so many scenarios across the entire galaxy to play with. It'd be great to have a modern version of Empire at War because Empire at War is still great even today. So
Yeah.
I would love that. And just the quality that you hear around Warhammer. There have been some duds, and I can't say I know which games have been duds. I've heard plenty of people complain about certain games. So there have been some duds, but the quality around Warhammer, the fact that it's like a AAA PC only title, there's that element of quality that's around the franchise, that kind of consistency around the franchise that I've always heard and respected and admired. So on the face of it, this seems like a pretty great thing to me as Star Wars games start to get back into the swing of things, as we start to have a variety of genres of Star Wars games, start to have a variety of Star Wars projects in the works at the same time instead of waiting every 3-4 years for a Star Wars game, starting to get maybe a different style Star Wars game every year. I don't think will cause any burnout because if you get an RTS one year, if you get a first person shooter the next year, if you get a third person action game or story driven RPG, that changes up the flavor enough to where it doesn't all just feel like Star Wars game after Star Wars game, right? And so every time I hear a new Star Wars game announced, especially if it's from a developer that works on a certain genre that Star Wars hasn't usually gone in, I'm pretty excited about it.
Yeah, and I did a little bit of research into this, and from what I can tell, especially from what Eckhart's Ladders and all these a little bit more Star Wars video game focused channels are, there should be a lot of excitement around this because the Total War series has been long running. It's been, like you said, like very heavily centered on Warhammer, but it apparently internally Warhammer is now being looked at as just like another project for them, and they're trying to make this Star Wars game their flagship. And this is not to even include the Bit Reactor game that survived all those layoffs. Like people were confirming, like, no, the game is still in development. So from what I can tell and what I've been able to piece together, it seems like the Bit Reactor, which is also an RTS game, that's going to be a little bit more of like that Empire at War where you can like port it over to different consoles, maybe even mobile, be able to play this, right? Whereas Total War games, you have to play on PC. They're like very graphics intensive at times. There's a lot of camera movement and everything. So this might not really beat Empire, or this might be even better if they are using the Total War formula. And there is some discussions that are implying that it's just not going to be like a Star Wars skin, like they're really trying to make something out of it. And to your point, Liam, like, yeah, video games are where Star Wars should be able to kind of like run free. Like, we've had the Jedi games, and those are like very lore driven, very Star Wars familiar, right? But you can go and do all these things throughout the galaxy, throughout different eras, and people won't mind because the galaxy is big. You don't have to make all these characters that show up in games like the most important characters ever, right? Like I think a great example is Star Wars Squadrons. It was $10-15 cheaper than your average video game, but incredible flight controls. Like I haven't played it in a while, but I really do been feeling the urge again because they added so many classes, B-wings and everything else by the end there. If they had kept on adding maps to that game, I think people would be talking about it way more because it's super fun. So I'm hoping that this being part of a Total War like title, there's going to be a lot of support. There's going to be a lot of different eras you can play around with. There's going to be like the flexibility of even modding it a little bit more so than the bit reactor one. So I'm excited. Like it might not be a game that we even like review on this channel because that's not something we have like much experience in, even though I'm definitely down to try it. But if it's something that we do fall in love in, you can make campaigns out of it. Like, yeah, we'll definitely let you guys know. And if you're interested and want to see something like that, let us know because we need Star Wars games to pop off, man. Like it's been too long. That EA exclusivity deal is only recently been finished, right? We're waiting for like the floodgates to open. And I'm not expecting early 2000s Lucasfilm games level ever again. I think that seems just a little too ridiculous. But I'm thinking with a little bit of the Lucasfilm story group being involved and a lot more of these AAA developers, we can get some really solid hits. And you don't have to have a hit every single time. You just have to make sure that the ones at least like a hit a year if you're going to bring out 2 games.
Yeah, and I think if we had more games coming out, there would be a little more forgiveness towards titles like Battlefront 1 and 2 when they came out and were a little bit lesser than we were expecting, or even something like Outlaws if it kind of hits the level we're all kind of anticipating and it's not incredible, that would be something nobody would really care about if we got a Star Wars game every year. But since we don't get Star Wars games every year, it's a lot more exciting and important when a Star Wars game is released than it used to be. And so, not that I want to get away from the event that would be the launch of a Star Wars game, but video games, the genre of the genres with inside video games are so much more different than genres within film or TV, where you could get two completely different types of genre in film and TV, but it'll still feel like you're watching Star Wars. If you get two different video games in the same year or a video game every year and they're both in completely different play styles, they'll feel like completely different experiences and won't just feel like, oh, I'm playing a Star Wars game again. It'll feel completely different. So I'm looking forward to it. I think this could be something that's really big for the Star Wars universe, like something where finally not just these big AAA studios like EA or Ubisoft who are trying to capitalize and make money off of the Star Wars name more so than they are really giving it to powerful, creative developers. And this type of developer taking on this type of project gives some credence to the idea of Star Wars being an IP that a lot of developers think they can turn into not something that's just profitable or widely played, but something that could actually lend itself to a massive kind of cool game-changing game. Because Star Wars has been involved in game-changing video games in the past, whether it be TIE Fighter or KOTOR. So, this would be hopefully another major step in the right direction as Lucasfilm Games starts to kick off and enter that era post EA exclusivity. So we do have some comments about this topic. Send them in if you'd like to talk about Total War Warhammer developer taking on Star Wars game. We also already talked about Skeleton Crew a little bit earlier, but if you have a question or a comment about the Skeleton Crew information that was leaked, let us know in the chat and we'll get to it as soon as we can. Chris says, speaking of TV shows, the hardest part of the Acolyte is going to be making it rewarding to the High Republic hardcores and accessible to fans who only watch the cinematic content. I'll never believe a Star Wars video game. Okay, that's a separate comment. As for the Acolyte, I think you have to look at the Acolyte in a little bit different light than the High Republic book initiative, because it takes place 100 years after when phase 3 is supposed to end. So there's still so much story in between. I think the way they treat Vernestra, the way they talk about the period, the way, they allude to what happened without us actually having read what happened, because we're still a little less than a year away from having read everything High Republic, because there's still more supposed to come out in spring next year. How they avoid spoilers while also giving credence to the fact that major things happened in the High Republic that were game changing and changed the way the Republic looked at the galaxy and operated. That is going to be a hard line to toe. I'm already setting myself up as a book fan because of how much we've, already gotten um, pushed to the side as book fans in favor of Star Wars TV. I'm setting myself up for like a little bit of disappointment about how much of the era is really paid homage in this series. But I don't think that's something that I needs to be at the forefront, because it's so long after. If this was a series that took place 2 years after the events of the High Republic Phase 3 and they never referenced it at all, or they changed some stuff, I'd be pretty frustrated. But 100 years after, I think they give themselves enough wiggle room to just mention, oh yeah, that time that Markion Rowe and the Nile fought the Jedi. They could just kind of say something like that and give a little bit of a wink and some acknowledgement to the High Republic era. And I think that's enough for me as a High Republic hardcore. But the real trick is appealing to the broader audience. And I think that's going to be something they try to do with a lot of lightsabers and a lot of action. We'll see if it works, because obviously none of these characters anybody knows. I do think somebody like Yoda will probably show up at some point in this season of the show, but it's a matter of how much they need to rely on cameos to push the product out there and how much people just jump on board from the first episode. I do think Star Wars is a strong enough franchise, no matter what, that people will jump on if the reviews are amazing for the first few episodes. If they're mediocre or mixed, people are going to wait until it's all over and eventually binge it one day.
Yeah, and I mean, look at what we have so far in the marketing, right? It is totally new Jedi, totally different color lightsabers. We've seen the Vernestra Rwoh whip, right, which we're going to talk about a little later here. We've seen some cool ships. We've seen some asteroids. We've seen the Jedi Temple. We've seen Vernestra herself, and yeah, this masked guy with some like really serious dental work on his mask. That's really all we've seen. Now, do you need to know anything related to the original trilogy, the sequels, the prequels for this? I don't think so. Like, I'm trying to like be in the feet of someone who's never seen Star Wars or just super casual about it, and they're like, yeah, it's just something I've seen on like Spike TV when it's on like a rerun or something, right?
Man, those are the days.
Yeah, right. And it's like, okay, well, you want to watch this? Like, this kind of explains like why the Jedi act the way they do in the Phantom Menace. That's really all you need to know. That's all that like they've been telling us that you should know. Like, it's before the Phantom Menace. So yeah, I get that almost fear a little bit. Like, oh, what will this High Republic initiative like pan out to with this being like already established as like an era closer? How many of the characters will survive and be here 100 years later to have a role in the story? I know Leslie Headlands has said so far, just for Nestor right now, I didn't want to add too many more, but there are options if we get a second season, right? Like, I think the best way to look at it is that the High Republic big conflict for the Jedi themselves is the books. The Acolyte is more for the galaxy. Like, what are the stakes going to be happening? What's going to change? The Jedi are already in progress into who they are by the time of the prequels in the Acolyte. That's what I believe. I don't think we'll see the super idealistic or happy Jedi. I don't think we'll also see them in like terrified about the Nile or the Nameless either. I think it'll just be like, yeah, okay, we're Jedi, but we've changed, and a lot of us are so too young to even realize how much we've changed. That's all you're gonna really get out of that. I think Vernestra, we're gonna at least be like able to get some hints at stuff happening in Phase 3 with her. I'd love if somehow Temptation and the Force kind of lines up with the Acolyte because it's so close to each other timeline or release wise. Sorry, but yeah, I don't. I don't think they're trying to like block off High Republic book fans, but they're trying to make it pretty clear, like it's 100 years later. The thing that you should feel 100 years closer to is the Phantom Menace. You should feel 100 years
Right.
further away from where the High Republic has ended up as. So, yeah, I get the worry of balancing it, Chris. But like Liam said, it's not something just a couple years later. They've already given us a character and her full lightsaber slash light whip combo. I think that's pretty good considering that it is a lot of humans in the High Republic that we've been following.
Right.
Even if they got the Force to prolong their life, they're not going to live that long.
Well, and I think in a lot of ways the Acolyte's going to be used as a soft launch point too for Phase 4, because there's no way that Phase 3 just ends the High Republic for good. I could see them jumping again. We've speculated about, oh, will Phase 4 go back to after Phase 2 and start to tell that story in between the 150 years between Phase 2 and Phase 1. For those of you, confused, watch our Star Wars reading guide for the High Republic, because they keep jumping around. They haven't talked about Phase 4 yet. Obviously, we're right in the midst of Phase 3. There's still about a year left of Phase 3 coming out, and a new book is coming out in a month. So we'll see how that might tie into maybe some Acolyte hints, because the new book is going to be coming out a couple weeks after Acolyte starts. So maybe there's some things that tie in that regard. But I do think maybe like a Phase 4, Phase 5 of High Republic might be kind of soft launched by whatever the Acolyte is doing. Maybe hints, the typical Star Wars thing that we've seen all the way since A New Hope, of like referencing something that we've never seen, but it builds the world out, and then you go back and tell that. I think that could be what the Acolyte does, more so than spoil. I hope they don't spoil what happens in the books, because obviously we still have a year left of reading those. But instead of spoiling or talking about things that happen in Phase 1, 2, and 3, they could be kind of referencing some things that Vernestra or other Jedi did in between Phase 3 and the Acolyte. So we'll see. Chris also says, I'll never believe a Star Wars video game rumor until a trailer drops. Well, don't even believe it when a trailer drops, Chris, because Eclipse, we talked about, 3 years ago, and still not even a hint about that game ever actually happening. So, and KOTOR remake, as I know you mentioned a little bit lower here in the comments. So, yeah, 2 Star Wars video games that were announced with trailers and never actually seem like they're going to see the light of day anytime soon. So yeah, and then Travis says, a question I feel you guys could answer best, but I just finished Fallen Star and was wondering if Eye of Darkness was the proper story to jump into next. It is, well, it depends what you're reading, Travis. If you are reading everything, then no. If you're just reading the books, the adult books, then it would be. If you don't want to go back in time 150 years to Phase 2, because Phase 2 takes place prior to Phase 1, 150 years prior to Phase 1. It kind of sets up and alludes to how the Nile were created and how the Jedi kind of got to where they were in Phase 1. So if you want to read that stuff, then you go to Phase 2, and that would mean the next adult book you would read would be Convergence. If you don't want to read Phase 2 and you just want to continue with the story of Marchion Ro and the Nile and the Jedi at that time, then the Eye of Darkness would be where you jump to next. If you want to read everything, then there are some post Fallen Star stuff that you should read, like definitely Eye of the Storm. It's a 2-issue comic book series. You definitely should read that.
Yeah.
And there also is the Tales of Light and Life short story collection book that does reveal some things about how certain characters come back into the fold in the High Republic in between Phase 1 and Phase 3. So those are some other things you can pick up on. But yeah, if you're just reading adult books, next would be The Eye of Darkness.
Yeah, and I would also include Shadows of Starlight if you want to get a little bit more of some of those characters that are referenced in Tales of Light of Life. Some of them are centered around in Tales of Light of Life, but like Liam said, it is dependent on if you want to get a little bit more of like the proto Nile story and what the Jedi were like a little bit more in the idealistic time of the High Republic before the great disaster and everything sets this whole story into motion here. Yeah, I mean, those would be the ones to recommend. I want to double down on what Liam said about the Eye of the Storm. There are 2 jumbo side comic issues especially that second issue is so important for the setup of the Eye of
Yeah.
Darkness. I'd say the first 100 pages of the Eye of Darkness almost doesn't make sense unless you're aware of what happens in that second issue at bare minimum.
Yeah, absolutely. It is without a doubt the most essential comic books that have come out in the High Republic. Like
Yeah.
they very much so are an epilogue to the Fallen Star. Travis also says, "What's a game genre we haven't seen in Star Wars that you'd like to see?" That we haven't seen in Star Wars, I think
Honestly.
we've tackled pretty much all of them, like even up to kart racers with Super Bombad Racing. Like we've done a video game in almost every genre. One that we haven't seen in a long time, I'd love to see an RTS. I would love to see an RPG because we really haven't done a traditional Star Wars RPG since KOTOR 2. That would be something I would really love to see sometime soon. I doubt it. It's going to happen. And maybe a story-driven FPS because I love Republic Commando. I do love the story and like the time around that. A story-driven FPS would be pretty cool.
Yeah.
Maybe, maybe one of the only genres we haven't seen that would be pretty neat. This would be, a lot more niche than Star Wars is used to getting into, would be a tactical strategy game, like something in the realm of Fire Emblem or Final Fantasy Tactics, something like that. I would enjoy that. I do really like Fire Emblem, so I'd be down for that, but it would be a surprise if we got that.
Yeah, I mean it's hard to really say what Star Wars hasn't done in a while. I really want to see an MMO, and not like an MMORPG necessarily, something more closer to Star Wars Galaxies where you can just do what you want in the Star Wars Galaxy as
Mhm.
opposed to being very class driven and story dependent. And a lot of the old Republic fans, they will acknowledge that some of like the disappointment around the game is because it's like our KOTOR 3, even though it has no real connection, it's 300 years after KOTOR 2, and it's hard to really make some things work. And they have tried, and so those are oftentimes considered some of the weaker story elements and stuff like that. So I'd prefer something almost like not like a Galaxies per se, but something that maybe set in the High Republic where we can really see like the expansion of the galaxy, and you can be a character that gets to do all these crazy things, but isn't dependent on like, oh, this is gonna happen at this timed event or something. It's like more like,
Right.
hey, if you build out your class skills in this guild, you can help be part of a big construction event thing or something. Like I'd love something like that where you can play some important roles in Star Wars lore, but you don't necessarily have to be like beholden to playing through specific paths and branches. I would also love like almost like a survival horror game. I think we've
Yeah.
gotten uh, it's the Red Harvest, and we've
Death
gotten
Troopers.
Dead Troopers, right? And I don't really love Death Troopers with their characters like that they throw in there halfway through the story. I'm not trying to spoil that, but if you can just go with some original characters, you don't have to do like zombies or viruses or anything. You could do like dark troopers and all these crazy imperial projects and machinations. If you want, you can do Sith Eternal stuff. You can do some weird things, make it almost feel like very much like Alien Isolation or something,
Mhm.
and just be like, oh my god, I'm just trying to live here. Because if there's a way to make Star Wars scary for people, I think video games are probably a better route than books and television, because there are definitely things that are a little bit more historical legacy that kind of shapes how Star Wars stories are told there. But video games, like we've been saying, you can try new things. If it doesn't work, it doesn't work. But there will be someone in like 30 years who will be like, oh man, that forgotten Star Wars horror game where you got to like go up against all these imperial machinations and all that. Like we need more of that again, right? People could be saying that, and that's how like these things will continue and come back and be reshaped in whatever the future Star Wars is. Just like how the past is definitely shaping our video games of today.
Right. And to your point there, somebody did make their own version of Death Troopers, a fan made game that a lot of people really liked. And so I do think Star Wars could lend itself to really fun survival horror. Even a lot of there's that one level in Genosis with Republic Commando that has a lot of survival horror elements in it too, with the darkness and all that. Would be very cool. Survival horror is one of my favorite genres. Big fan of Resident Evil and Dead Space and stuff like that. So it would be really neat to see Star Wars tackle that genre. And again, like that would be a genre too that, like you were mentioning, Sonic, like the cameos that are in the Death Troopers book feel kind of forced. Why not make new characters? Like I think one of the things that people love about Cal Kestis is he's a really well developed, and the characters in the Jedi games are very well developed original characters, and we need more original characters in Star Wars video gaming, because one of the things about Legends that worked so well is, yeah, they pushed the narrative into the future with post Return of the Jedi storytelling, but still a lot of like important storytelling for prequel era and stuff wasn't really tackled by Star Wars books as much as it was the shows or the movies, right? And so they kind of were in that same camp that we're in now. But how they got around that was they took side characters or
Yeah.
new characters, or obviously a character like maybe Quinlan Voss in the Republic comics, who's in the background of one scene in the Phantom Menace, and they really went for it and dove into like, let's make this character as beloved as the characters in the films. In today's Star Wars space in books and gaming and comics, we've really focused on the main characters. And then when we tell a main character story in a video game or a comic book or a book, a lot of times it's superfluous. It doesn't really matter to the main story. And if we do create new characters, a lot of them are one-off book characters. They show up one time and they never show up again. Let's make more video games like the Jedi Fallen Order and Jedi Survivor, where we develop basically a completely new cast of characters, and they go through their own journey and their own emotions and their own arcs. And that would work well if you were doing a survival horror game. You don't need to bring in random characters from Star Wars. You could just do it with new characters and then have them all die or have one of
Yeah.
them survive. And it would feel a little less weird to have a zombie game in Star Wars, or that type of, because you can have that little separation from the films, right, where it doesn't need to feel like it's exactly in that same universe, even if it is. So hopefully they start to go more down that route with video games here in the future, considering how big somebody like Cal Kestis has blown up amongst Star Wars fans.
Yeah, and I mean, it'd be great to also point out that these characters that we had, like Kyle Katarn back in the day, he got to just do his thing, and then he'd show up and become a little bit more of a supporting character for like Jedi Academy and all that. And he'd have his own Padawans, they'd have their own storyline, he'd pop in here and there. Like these are characters that can also almost like take a step back when you reach with these legacy characters in different mediums, right? Like obviously during the video game eras of the 90s and 2000s, you didn't have Mark Hamill reprising his role at that point and be like, okay, we're gonna cast a Kyle Katarn, even though there are like actually cast people who played these characters in the very first Dark Forces games, right? So I would love that these characters get to do their thing and be important in their medium, show up and be like supporting characters, and you can kind of stick to most of their main characterization and not have a lot of plot be dependent on them. And then they'll be like, oh man, that was so awesome when did that one thing with Luke. But anyways, here's
Right.
my journey again, right? That's how these media switches should be happening. And it's interesting that we've also talked about the High Republic because so much of it has been really good, but it's hard for a lot of people to get fully invested because you'd read something about Vernestra Rwoh in like a young adult novel and be like, wait, where did she pop in from? If you'd never read the middle school books, right? And then
Right.
you find out she's Stellan's Padawan and he's only in the adult novels. And then there's some of the comics where Avar suddenly becomes the main character, like a deuteragonist there, even though she
Yeah.
was like the Jedi protagonist of Light of the Jedi. And Star Wars needs to learn how to like balance out how people participate in these different mediums. You can't expect everyone to buy into everything, even if it is in a similar media, like with books and comics and
Right.
even different types of books. So video games, just a great way to like be almost as lifelike as you want and still do some incredible storytelling and lore. But then if you're going to start pumping them into the TV shows or movies, just make sure that they're not like dependent on all of that stuff and they can just be who they are, make some cool things, and then jump back in, right? That's the problem a lot of people feel about Rebels not getting its animated sequel and it's showing up in Ahsoka. Suddenly you're like, I don't know
Right.
any of this. To be fair, Rebels was also on Disney XD, which is like such a hard channel for most people to buy into. but still, I think video games are a good way for Star Wars to start learning how to balance things out, and then applying that to the books and applying that to the movies and shows.
So we'll do one more question here from Chris, and then we're going to move on to our last topic, and then we'll get back to your guys' questions for the remainder of the video. So make sure you keep sending those in. Oh, actually, we have a super chat from Toydarian Dan. Thank you so much for the super chat. So we're going to get to that question, then we'll get to yours, Chris, and then we're going to move on to our last topics about the Acolyte, which is kind of tied into a lot of what we've talked about already. And then we'll move back into the rest of the questions for the remainder of the stream for about the last 45 minutes here. So make sure you send in your chats and everything still. But thanks so much to Toytarian Dan for super chat. Any chance Star Wars Land will expand with the news of approval of Disney expansion? That's a great question. Thank you so much. It revolves around Disneyland Forward, which, if a lot of you guys aren't familiar with Disneyland Forward, I'm a big Disney parks guy, so I've been following this very closely. The city of Anaheim just officially confirmed the plans for Disneyland Forward, which is to get rid of, if you're familiar with the Disneyland Resort, to get rid of the parking lot for downtown Disney right next to the Pixar Place Hotel and the Disneyland Hotel, and expand it into California Adventure expansion, and then get rid of the drop-off area in Disneyland Hotel parking lot and expand Disneyland into there. Well, one of the interesting things, Toydarian Dan, and for everybody out there, is that Star Wars Land kind of borders where that Disneyland parking lot would be, Disneyland Hotel parking lot would be. And so technically you could have an expansion. We have also seen with Universal for their Harry Potter lands, they're doing a third one in the new Universal Epic Adventure park that's coming to Florida, and so, or Epic Universe. So they have a third Harry Potter land there. They already have two in Florida. We have one in Hollywood, and then there's some across overseas. So if I don't know if necessarily an expansion of Star Wars Land per se, the Galaxy's Edge, but you could hypothetically make a second Star Wars Land, and maybe one that might be a little bit more tying into some of the things that are super popular now, i.e., like Mandalorian and stuff like that. I love Galaxy's Edge. I think it's amazing what they've done with it. But one of the big flaws with it was the fact that by getting rid of the LARPing element, the live action role playing element that they promised when they announced, with like actors walking around constantly as creatures, droids constantly roaming around, just like it's supposed to make you feel like you're actually in a Star Wars world and not just a land themed to Star Wars. By getting rid of that, but keeping the sequel only theming, they've really boxed themselves in to like, we can really only have characters and things walking around here who are sequel related. I think I always thought they should have gone for an original trilogy timeline setting, because that's just the most accessible era of Star Wars. That's the one that your grandparents have seen. That's the one that your kids have seen. Like, everybody's seen the original trilogy and everybody loves the original trilogy. So I always felt like, yeah, maybe it's safe, but to go with a Vader and stormtroopers and like all those types of characters walking around the park would have been a little safer. Even if you went with, I like the idea of going with a completely new, unique planet we can build on and have this like lore around. So I like that idea, but maybe if they are looking for an excuse to maybe have an original trilogy or prequel era setting for something, they could build a second land or find a way to expand. They do have a little bit of expansion area for cast members in the back. There's been rumors about a restaurant for a while, but I think maybe enough for one more ride. Otherwise, I don't know if they'll directly be able to expand into Disneyland Forward, but they will be able to possibly build a second land in that area.
I really can't add anything much here because I'm not the expert on this, but I guess like idea wise, yeah, I'd love the LARPing to at least come back in some contained form. That's kind of what the Galactic Star Cruiser was for, but
Right.
yeah, as a hotel experience, 4K, and you didn't even have Disney Plus on the TVs there, like it was just super mishandled. It's just aesthetically also very bland in a lot of ways, even though there's like some like important lore about like another meetup with Rey and Kylo Ren on board and everything, which is like it's a little frustrating. But if there's a way to just you know put that into Galaxy's Edge and just be like it's docked here for the day, and then
Right.
stuff happens on here, and like, or like make it more almost like Rise of the Resistance, where you're walking through ships because you're like maybe in a shipyard or something, and you can do
Mhm.
something a little bit more contained to like a very like familiar like Star Wars setting that isn't dependent on lore or anything, just as more like this is a situation you're in. It's like a docking bay or something. Yeah, that would be great. As it is right now, like we have the cornered off Millennium Falcon, we have like an X-wing, we've got that really cool landing craft, but that's really about it, right? Having something where you step in, like maybe making like a LARP cantina would be awesome. That's something that every era of Star Wars has touched on or like dealt with, so everyone has an idea of how to deal with it. And having these characters under a roof, maybe that's what makes it simpler for you. I don't know. If somehow we get Dex's Diner showing up like as like an offshoot, he's got a little extra money by the sequel
That'd be
era,
cool.
and then you can like step in, have some Jawa juice, and mingle around like that. That'd be awesome. Just it doesn't have to be insanely immersive, but maybe that's a great first step to maybe making Galaxy's Edge eventually reach its original potential.
Yeah. And I think I like the idea of the rides being canon and the time period being canon, but I do think it was always a mistake to make such an especially because the land takes place between episode 8 and 9,
8
which
and
is only
9,
1 year
yeah.
long. I think it was a mistake to box themselves into that small of a time period. So, I mean, my ideal version of Galaxy's Edge, right, is to strip the First Order resistance theming, which would be very easy, honestly. You would have to, yeah, change Kylo's ship to maybe a TIE fighter or something, TIE Advance or Imperial shuttle. But other than that, you could just pull down the flags and put, Imperial flags. You could strip the sequel theming, but keep Rise of the Resistance, obviously. And that could just be a ride that self-contained story within that time period between 8 and 9. It's an incredible ride. It's still to me one of my favorite rides I've ever been on. And whether you like the sequels or not, it is one of the best rides in the world.
Yeah.
Um, but you could keep that ride, and that ride can take place during that time period, and then maybe everything else is a more nebulous, like it might take place during this time period. They already kind of started that by putting the Mandalorian and Grogu and Boba Fett and Fennec Shand and all these characters, Sabine, Hera, Ahsoka, Chopper. They're all in Galaxy's Edge now. They just all stay to like one little corner that's not as themed to a specific era. So yeah, if they start to strip the theming, maybe make it a bit more accessible to all eras of Star Wars. I'd love to see like a ride that takes place in each era, to have a prequel ride, have a Clone Wars era ride. You could have I mean, really, they were supposed to, for Smuggler's Run was supposed to have 3 missions. And there are 2 that I've heard are ready. They just have never put it into the actual ride. They just kept it
Yeah.
1 mission. So if they added those 2 missions, maybe they could change the era for them, because obviously Hondo and Chewbacca are kind of the only characters in that ride. You could say it's a part of any era, really. It could be about the Clone Wars, it could be part of the Rebels era, it could be a part of anything. Obviously, Millennium Falcon's not really during the Clone Wars, but you know what I mean. It could take place anywhere. So hopefully we do get some type of expansion of Star Wars material with Disneyland Forward. Um, as K-pop Times is saying down here, we they are saying that the Avatar land is going to be in the California Adventure expansion, probably. So, and it's going to be a different Avatar land actually than what they have in Orlando. There's the concept art that they released looks more inspired by the Way of Water than it does the original Avatar. So it looks pretty exciting. I'd like to see them do it. And yeah, the Star Cruiser closed before any of us really got to try it. I think that was a little bit of a mismanagement in terms of price. There nobody really could afford to add that to their Disneyland trip if you're flying cross country, or Disney World trip if you're flying cross country and only stay for 2 nights. So yeah, that I we'll see what they do in the future. But thanks so much for the question, and then we'll get to the rest of these comments as we continue through this. Scroll back up to Chris up here. Says, speaking, wait, no, that was the wrong one. In terms of video games, do you guys think the KOTOR remake will be modified and used as a way to canonize Knights of the Old Republic, or will it stay strictly Legends? That is a question that we did a video about this a long time ago when they first announced it, when we were still a very, very small channel. Um, and I'm still of the opinion that in order to maximize what KOTOR is, I would prefer it to be Legends. I would prefer them to just completely ground up remake one of the greatest video games of all time, make it even better with brand new combat, brand new, graphics and cutscenes and everything. Just make this the best version of KOTOR we could ever possibly have. And in order for that to happen, I think it has to be Legends. And because KOTOR is one of the things that starts the entirety of the Old Republic era, it is, for all intents and purposes, the thing that almost everything took its look for the Old Republic era from, because Tales of the Jedi, which takes place like 20 years before, nothing looks like Tales of the Jedi after Tales of the Jedi in the Old Republic era. So, because it's kind of the thing of the Old Republic era, I personally would love them to just make it Legends, really go in, make it as perfect as possible. Don't change anything, just make everything better, enhance it. That would be my ideal version of KOTOR remake. That being said, I would love a KOTOR canon story. I just worry about what we might lose if it is canon.
Yeah, and I've heard some rumors recently this week that Disney's finally decided it's going to be a Disney Plus show, which I guess for the length of the KOTOR game, that makes sense. You can really divide it into like more than like 4 chapters, and you'd have almost every episode be super unique and uh, be able to like almost make it like a planet per episode, which would be really awesome. But then you'd have to, if you really want to maximize it, you have to make it 45 minutes runtime minimum to make these planets worthwhile. Otherwise, it'll be like a fetch quest every single episode, which is going to be a little annoying.
Right.
And yeah, I'm of the opinion that it should be Legends if they are trying to make a great game. My one issue, if they're going to do it Legends, is that they need to make a little bit more connective tissue between this game and KOTOR 2 if they're going to do an eventual remake of that, because if people talk about whiplash between The Force Awakens and The Last Jedi, I can only imagine what people were thinking with KOTOR 1 and KOTOR 2, because 2 people love, but people who love KOTOR 2 do not like KOTOR 1. People who love KOTOR 1 do not like KOTOR 2. The people who love both are like, I love them because they're great video games, but not necessarily as like connected stories, right? So right? If they're really trying to make it so that the games can be on their own and are purely Legends, sure, but maybe make things a little bit more connected. Maybe if they do a KOTOR 2, leave it as like a tease for what a KOTOR 3 could be if they really want to continue doing Legends work, because they are already still doing stuff with the Old Republic MMO. That's still new stuff coming out yearly. Um, and I mean, aesthetically, I'd want it to change though, especially KOTOR 2 just simply starts. They start wearing prequel robes 4,000 years before the prequels, which annoys me to no end. But at least KOTOR 1, I could say like there are some slightly different robes, but they're as a fan of Tales of the Jedi, there's nothing similar, man. At least make some of the robes look more similar. There's more Tales of the Jedi robes in Star Wars: The Old Republic than there are in KOTOR, which frustrates me to no end because a lot of the items have the same names of like a lot of characters, like the
Mm-hmm.
Quadroma stuff. It annoys me to no end. So if at least change aesthetically how the game looks, put some teases for like, hey, if we continue this, we'll have KOTOR 3, right? Then I'd be fine with that. I at the same time though, I think Revan is such a huge character that I know the choice of like making it a man or a woman or however else you want to make the character look like and play through and have these relationships and all that. They're such a core part of the experience. But I also want like a definitive story for these characters. I did not like how it was handled in the Revan novel in the second half, especially with how KOTOR 2 was handled. It just, if you're gonna do it, I want it to be rich. I want it to have like a movie at the center. I want to have a game
Yeah.
deal with like more of the supporting characters. I want TV shows kind of combining both worlds, and then books and stuff. I want it to be even bigger than the High Republic Initiative has been so far. And we're about to take that next leap with the High Republic Initiative with the Acolyte. But if we do the Old Republic, it's gotta be insanely massive. It's gotta work on its timeline a little bit. It's gotta have some connections far-reaching to all these different eras. You gotta do it super definitively, and that takes away some of the charm. But if you're gonna take away some of the charm, you have to make sure that the story is as perfect as can be as an adaptation. It can't be the pseudo heir to the Empire adaptation that we're getting with the Mandoverse. It has to be as close as possible and still fit in with the established canon that is being fleshed out in between, in my opinion.
No, I mean, I completely agree. And that's why I don't think canonizing KOTOR works.
Yeah,
Like, you have to retool a lot of what the Old Republic era was,
yeah,
and how you're going to present it here in the future. And so, in my opinion, I think the way they've done it, kind of working backwards from High Republic, I think from High Republic we could jump to, I know you've always thrown out like that kind of dark ages of Star Wars
yeah.
idea in between Bane and what we've seen in the High Republic, and I think that would work. But if we didn't do that, I would jump straight into the Baneite era and really explore the Rule of Two, because I think that's, again, working backwards. You touch on the Phantom Menace stuff still from the Rule of Two and show us what the end of the era looks like. Because I do think there should be some type of significant gap between Bane and KOTOR. I just don't think it needs to be 2,500 years. I think it could be 1,000 years, but I don't think it needs to be 2,500 years between KOTOR and Bane. So if we get Bane, then we can jump maybe to the beginning of Old Republic era and start with the Tales of the Jedi and Mandalorian Wars and KOTOR story and all that type of stuff, and really build its way to where we ultimately get it. And I do think TV would be the best place for that. I think multimedia initiative would be perfect. Films maybe dealing with Revan specific stories could be better, and then you fill it in with maybe the Keldroma and Exar Kun stuff in a TV show. You fill it in with KOTOR 2 stuff in TV show. You could really enhance it and give it this full weight of what the Mandalorian Wars and everything looks like at the time. But they need to go all in with that period. And so I think right now, the way storytelling at Lucasfilm is kind of divided amongst multiple different eras. You have the like pre-Phantom Menace stuff we're trying to flesh out with High Republic, Acolyte, and whatever comes up after Acolyte, whether it's more seasons of Acolyte or other shows that bridge Acolyte to Phantom Menace. That's a focus of Lucasfilm right now. You also have the focus within the Star Wars universe, within the original saga, telling stories between episode 1 and 6. And then you have the other focus, which is the New Republic, and building out how do we get from Return of the Jedi to the sequels. With the division of focus so big in Lucasfilm right now, I do think, and I hope, that they wait until a lot of these stories have been told and then really go for it with the Old Republic. Yeah, that might mean we have to wait like 10 years or so, but I'm willing to wait 10 years if it's good. I don't want them to start something and then it be like just another thing they have to do. And then now they're spread out in so many different places that we can't get great all in Old Republic storytelling, because I think pretty much everyone across the board who's sampled anything from Old Republic, whether it be video games, whether it just be the cinematic trailers from Star Wars The Old Republic, whether it be comic books, or anybody who's read some of the novels in the Old Republic, whether it be Bane or the Old Republic tie-in books, it's an era that at the very least is incredibly rich, and you don't need to love the characters or the storytelling to love the world of the Old Republic. And I think almost everybody loves the world that exists in the Old Republic. And in order for the Disney canon version to do justice to what was built with the Legends version, with its mess and all, they need to go all in. And I don't want the focus to be spread out across 20 different things, and then the Old Republic's just another little side thing we're working on too. No, that should be the number one thing they're working on. Everything else should be little tiny side things on the side. So we'll see how long it takes them to get there. But I do think they understand for the most part, and that's why we haven't seen Old Republic in the 10 years since Star Wars canon has started, because I think they understand like that's a home run for us, an easy home run. We just need to make sure we do it right. And instead of forcing something out, they are kind of building their way towards it. And
Yeah,
I think that's the way to do it.
and you're 100% right. Like I know my dark times. No, okay, that's the wrong word because we already have a dark times. But like
Dark Ages.
the dark ages of Star Wars idea is more so because we've had a lot of questions about like how developed is the Galactic Republic, how connected is it, especially with High Republic being like, oh, Togrutas are now finally being included in the Republic, and then in Star Wars: The Old Republic, you have Togrutas are like, well, no, we've like been all connected and established. So it does
Right.
raise a lot of questions. So if anyone who hasn't been around for years on our channel, what I say by Dark Ages is that because of Bane, because of all these new Sith Wars, because of the constant fighting for millennia, the galaxy should almost feel like it's broken apart, disconnected, and then this republic that is starting again from the center of the galaxy slowly is building out and trying to do things right and little differently. And I'd argue to make the old Republican canon work even better is to almost change how we look at the politics of that era, because it really does feel copy pasted in a lot of ways to what we have in the
Right.
prequels. I want the old Republic to almost feel like different governments that are like being held loosely together and all that, and a little bit more tribalistic, even though it's not going to be the old Republic of old, right? Maybe that's what we're slowly building towards, them merging together and all. We don't really see that, and I'd love to have that almost happen, sort of the way it is in Tales of the Jedi, because there's like different planetary systems with their own governments who are like sending their representatives to the Republic. That's by the time of KOTOR, it's not like that. It's just
Yeah.
unified, which again, it's a messy era. Frustrates me no end, which is why that's what I'm saying. We need that Dark Ages, but also like we're saying, keep it Legends, because the stuff that we do know about Old Republican canon, one of the biggest ones is Tar Vizsla. He's a
Right.
Mandalorian
Yeah.
who is a Jedi, who is like the first Mandalore. And I know a lot of like super hardcore Mandalorian fans probably don't love that, like the idea of your first Mandalorian being a Jedi. But if that is the case now, right? If he is truly the first, then he's gonna have like a huge impact on the Old Republic established story that we do have in KOTOR and everything. Like,
Hmm.
okay, is he like around with Mandalore the ultimate? Who does he give away to? Does he fight Revan? Is he the Mandalore that he defeats and stuff? Like, there's a lot of questions to be asked about combining what we do have from canon too. So yeah, I expect that they really need to work on the timeline, work on the politics, work on the feel of combining some of the more weirder, quirkier stuff of ancient feeling Tales of the Jedi versus the almost too modern uh Old Republic era that we got. But I think it can work, and I honestly, this is a bet right now. I think Leslie Headland is going to make our first overt reference to the Old Republic
Oh yeah.
in the Acolyte. She's such an Old Republic fan, such an EU fan, especially a Sith fan. So it only makes sense that she'd have something, even if it's like some artifact or something, or maybe some character throwing, but giving a throwaway line talking about the Old Republic and give us like a first look at like, okay, so what is this era like? When is it set?
Absolutely. I completely agree. I think there'll be Old Republic galore references
Yeah,
in this show. I mean, already obviously we had the second trailer that referenced the Sith Code, which is a big part of
yeah,
the Bane books. So I think nonetheless, maybe even maybe not full Old Republic, but nonetheless, it will have references to Bane, especially because Bane's lineage will be all over the Acolyte. And maybe that's a good transition into our final topic finally, because we do only have about 15 minutes from usually when we wrap up these streams. We can go a little longer, so we still have so many questions to answer, but I don't know if we'll get to everybody's questions tonight, unfortunately. So send in a super chat if you would absolutely like your question to be answered. Always helps out the show. And we appreciate the support, gets your question bumped up to the top, but we will try to get to as many as possible. We've got to talk about the last thing, especially that was on our thumbnail. Have a bunch of other topics we can talk about. A lot of them are a little smaller, so we don't need to go into all of them. But let's talk about the Lightwhip, because this was big news. I don't think it was something that's surprising. In fact, it would have been something that would have been incredibly frustrating not to see. If you're bringing in Vernestra Rwoh, one of the iconic things about her is the Lightwhip. It's bringing that back from Lumia in Star Wars Legends with the comics and Legacy of the Force and all that, but it's something that's incredibly important to her character and her arc, being shamed by the rest of the Jedi Order for having it, being something she's hidden away. Vernestra, for those of you who don't know, one of the youngest Jedi to ever become a Jedi Knight. At the age of 16, she's a Jedi Knight in the Old Republic. And now we see her 100 years later she's well well matured past that point. But even in the most recent time we've seen Vernestra in Defy the Storm, still struggling with the light whip reveal, and how she feels like people are going to see her for having it. So it's a massive part of her character, something that's really integral for who she is. And now that we have Master Vernestra Rwoh, one of the elite members of the Jedi Order at the time in the High Republic, she she should have this, and she should be very comfortable using it, and should be something that like kind of the rest of the Jedi are kind of reverent about, because it's Master Vernestra. She has the light whip. What were your thoughts when we got to see this in the little TV spot the other day?
See, I was actually a little surprised because visually we've only ever seen her specific light whip on some middle grade novel covers, right? So people
Yeah.
were like, "Oh, obviously there's gonna be the incredibly like difficult Star Wars fandom who just hates anything that's fun, right? This is not science fiction, people. This is space fantasy. It's gonna have some silly things here." And I get the idea if you like Lumia's idea of the light whip over what we have here with Vernestra. That one is got like a bunch of different cables that are like put in a bunch with lightsaber properties, right, shining around it, but they're all individually weaker, right? So a lot of it is the element of surprise and its unpredictability on how you're using that whip. All right, you have to be like an Indiana Jones-esque character with how good you are using your weapon for the different functionality of it. But it's not like it's an old concept. Like there are some people who are immediately dismissing, like, "Oh, why are they doing this again?" It sounded like 2015 all over for me when we saw the first, or 2014, I guess, the first teaser for The Force Awakens, where we see Kylo Ren's double lightsaber. And yeah, maybe I don't love the cross guard that he specifically uses, but then you realize it's not really a cross guard. This man messed up his lightsaber, like bleeding it. It's like exhaust ports that he needs to do to keep it somewhat sustainable. And he also is clearly an edgy fanboy, so he wanted to make his look a little crazier in general, right? So in that same vein, I was like, all right, what are we gonna do with the lightweight? Are we gonna add something like that we can understand about it? Is there gonna be an explanation? I don't know yet, but immediately we just see her pull it out. She almost looks like she's twisting that part that they reference in the book on her lightsaber to turn it into a light whip, and then you see it elongate and go over her shoulder like a very top-down camera, and that's all we've gone so far. So one, very cool that it's here. Two, I'm surprised it's here because I thought for some reason we'd almost use her as a original trilogy Yoda sort of character where he's just very more reverent with the Force and not using it in a very martial sense. But she's clearly looks like she's stumbling upon all the Jedi that got like decimated by like Master Soul and everyone else by that Sith that we know about so far. So she clearly want to be extending her range a little bit. It looks like it'll be cool to see. I think the book's explanation is that like each part of it is kind of broken into pieces, so it's not like a pure like rope. It's gonna be like a little bit here straight, a little bit here straight. I don't know how much visually that's gonna really show off. I'm excited for it. I'd love for her to explain how she made something that can switch the forms too, because that's another thing. It's not that she just has a light whip from the start. It's a lightsaber that she can turn into a light whip and then back, which is totally new. And I don't need an explanation for it. But as I've been on her Twitter and all that, I've been telling people, I'm like, this is awesome. I just want her to be able to like explain a little bit more, especially with all the connotations of the Jedi being all upset and worried about it, right? She's combined their ideal form with something that reminds them of Dathomirian Night Sisters and all of these like more darker elements of the galaxy. Why is she using that? We still don't really know it. It's just that she has a vision, right? And how much of that is gonna like be part of her characterization. If you're gonna bring it here, if you're gonna show it in live action, I'd like it to reflect the character. So at the end of the day, if it works because the character's got some relation to it or something that is visually shown or explained that highlights her personality, it highlights who she is, what she's trying to do. If it's just there to be like, oh, it's a cool little purple light whip, I'm not gonna be bothered by that. I'm happy it's there, but I'd like for it to have purpose, just like it does in the books, like something that reflects a little bit of her character, where she is at that point in her life. And a little bit less of the trepidation and the unease that she has in the books right now.
Right. Yeah, and I mean I'm cool with it having no explanation too, because I think in a lot of Star Wars fans, people online who complain a lot of people's complaints always go back to logic or things like that, right? And that, to be fair about a lot of things, I critique a lot of the logic standpoints of Star Wars, but when you get to this, sometimes characters just have weapons or something in a fantasy series because they're special or unique or
Yeah.
cool. There, you don't need much more behind that. A visual dictionary can explain it if it wants to, but I don't need the show to tell me how this works. The lightsaber doesn't make sense how it works either in the original movie. Like, we've seen Mythbusters and stuff about lightsabers, right? They've talked about it. It would go around the entire universe and come back and hit you. It would never be able to stop. You can't stop beams of light. So in the original concept in 77, it didn't really make much sense either. And you didn't need to care or worry about why it exists, right? And I don't feel that way about the light whip. Now, where I will start to get a little frustrated is if 25 characters now start to have light whips, right? I think this should be a weapon that's unique to this character. Why does she have it? Because she's the only one that can make it. Something like that. If we go into the Old Republic and we want to talk about a time period when more people had light whips, okay, that's fine. But I don't need any more people close to the Phantom Menace to have light whips, right? It's same thing with different colored lightsabers, right? When we see Attack of the Clones, the arena battle, everybody is blue or green besides Sam Jackson. So I kind of want more explanation and story about why Jedi only become blue and green lightsaber users, what happens to the rest of the color spectrum of lightsaber, stuff like that. That's when it starts to mesh, when you have too many things close to Phantom Menace. But if you have 100 years before Phantom Menace, a character with a light whip and nobody else can build one and nobody else knows how, to me, that's not a problem at all. I think this is something that's cool for this character. I'm ready. I've been accepting it since 2021, and I think it has to be in this because it fits this character. I understand your point. Like if she never left the temple, right? We don't see this. Like if she's just a Yoda character, somebody who gives wisdom, maybe the master sitting headmaster on the Jedi Council, as we know that Yoda as the Grandmaster of the Jedi Order takes a lot of time off during the High Republic era of being that acting Grandmaster. Maybe she is the Master of the Order, filling that like Mace Windu position during this time on the Jedi Council. She just sits there and talks. Sure, we don't need to see it, but if she's doing any action at all, they have to have this, and I'm glad they do. And I don't really care what other people's complaints are because this is part of the character and part of the books, and I am all for just keeping continuity. So,
Yeah.
thank you for doing this, and hopefully it's awesome in action because I think it's something that could look really, really cool. But that's our last main topic. I did have a couple things that I guess I'll run down real quick. We won't really comment on them. If you guys want to leave a comment in the chat, you're welcome to. We just had a lot of Acolyte news this week, including that episodes 1 and 2 are going to come to theaters in foreign countries, not in the United States as of now, although there are rumors about it coming to the United States as well on the day that the episodes drop. A Cinemark has a listing for it on their website. I don't have any Cinemarks where I'm from, so that doesn't really help me. But maybe if you have a Cinemark in your area, you could go see it. I would assume if a smaller theater chain like Cinemark gets this, Regal and AMC will also get it in the United States as the two biggest movie theater chains. We'll see if that happens, but there are a lot of foreign countries, and especially European countries, and then also Japan, that are showing the first 2 episodes in a theater. So if you're interested in seeing the first 2 episodes in a theater, there's a possibility that could happen, and we'll get an announcement about that sometime soon. Also, a little topic, something we always kind of knew, but people have been asking Daisy Ridley, "Oh, should you want to see a reunion with Finn in New Jedi Order?" And she said yes. So not too much news there. She wants John Boyega to be in it. We know they have a great friendship, especially from the sequels. Their chemistry was always great on like talk shows and behind the scenes stuff. So I'm sure they're still pretty good friends. And I would love to see Finn back too. Finn, as a character who never really got his due, I think really deserved more than he got in after The Force Awakens, because I like him in Force Awakens. Few goofy lines that I don't love, But for the most part, I like his character, and I like the idea of a stormtrooper turning away from the Empire / First Order. Never got any more of him, so hopefully he gets his due if he shows back up in New Jedi Order. New Essential Legends collection books announced. We have Dark Lord: The Rise of Darth Vader, Scoundrels, Timothy Zahn book. I believe it's the now. Well, they haven't done Hand of Thrawn duology or the Mara Jade duology, but one of the final Zahn books that hasn't been put into the Essential Legends collection. So hopefully next is Hand of Thrawn and the Mara Jade duology, which I personally kind of want more because Choices of One never got an unabridged audiobook. So if we get a Choices of One unabridged audiobook from that, I would be very, very happy. Whereas we already have Hand of Thrawn audiobooks, and I'm all in it for the audiobooks on these Essential Legends. I already have all these books, but it's a cool way to get out there. So we have those two books coming out in the final set here, which, let me scroll through. I don't believe the set is coming out until next year. So, or the end of this year. No, February 5th. So you have a long time before these ones come out, but another more exciting news for Essential Legends, which now at this point, though, I love this series and I'm glad they're doing this, but at this point they are getting close to just being like all Legends book collection instead of just Essential Legends, because
yeah.
we've now probably done close to half of the books in Star Wars Legends. But keep putting them out because I really want more audiobooks from this. So that's kind of it for the news. Let's get back to the chat here to wrap up. We have reached the hour and a half mark, so we won't go too much longer, but we do have a super chat here from Colton Smith. Thank you so much. Says, love the weekly streams. Keep up the great work, guys. Thank you so much, Colton. We appreciate you always joining us during these streams. We love having you a part of these chats. You always give some great insight, great comments. So we do appreciate your support. Colton sends in right after this super chat. Off topic, any shows y'all are interested in? I'm looking forward to House of the Dragon. Me too. I really loved House of the Dragon season 1. Big surprise for me. I'll pass this to you mostly, Cynic, because I don't watch too many TV shows. To be honest, I am a movie guy. I've always been a movie guy. I love TV when it's Star Wars related or, big franchises, but I always have a hard time starting TV shows. I know for me, one that I haven't started yet, was kind of waiting for all the episodes to come out, and they have finished. I can't wait to watch Shogun. That looks so good, and I'm very excited about that. Also looking forward to, the typical stuff like in the world of pop culture, like Rings of Power and stuff like that. But House of the Dragon is my kind of summary show that I'm very much so looking forward to, the one I'm caught up with and actually looking forward to. So that would be it for me too.
Yeah, so I after Game of Thrones season 8, I was just like, I'm not watching anything in that franchise until we get the Jon Snow sequel show, which was rumored, and that's on back burner now. So I'm not really interested in House of the Dragon, even though I'm happy that people are enjoying it. I'm glad that there's good content again in that franchise as opposed to the last 2.5 or so seasons. Anything from season 5 onwards is very up and down for Game of Thrones on reflection, especially season 7 for me. 8 I can understand the bones of, but it would have made sense 10 seasons, 10 episodes in, as opposed to, oh, Daenerys just had a bad day and forgot her dragon. So I'm, until that's like somewhat course corrected, I'm just not touching that. It's just not my cup of tea anymore. And also, I don't know, I'm not always the biggest grimdark fan of, and especially in my fantasy. I'm a more of a Wheel of Time fan, and season 2 was last year. And Rings of Power, I enjoyed season 1, but it's like it is a lot of time compression. It is a lot of weird stuff happening there. Season 2 had its new trailer come out. It promises to be about like stuff that actually happens, that is actually been outlined by Tolkien, like the fall of Eregion, and production design looks a lot better here. It doesn't look like there's any COVID hampering here. And even if you never loved this show, I think visually it is stunning. So I can only hope to see that next level. It looks like Sauron gets to be a little bit more canonical too, appearance-wise, which makes me very happy. A little bit more Anatar action there. So I'm thinking that this season 2 could be like a real step forward, and we can look back in season 1 and be like, there's some solid things here, some world building more than anything that's finally paying off in season 2. So I'm excited for that. Very excited for the Bear season 3. It is a show that I feel like at this point you could drop weekly because of how critically acclaimed it is, but I don't care. I'm just gonna have the best food possible in front of me and watch all of it because I love that show. Love Jeremy Allen White. He was great in Iron Claw. Iberi's a superstar on the rise. Like such a such a big fan of that show. Other than that, I mean, I'm like in a very strange way, almost like very down to watch Clipped, that one FX show about like the original Clippers owner, just to see how trashy everything behind the scenes was. Uh, 90 show that 90 show season 2 got a trailer, and I'm a fan of that 70 show, and I enjoyed enough of season 1 of that 90 show. So they're doing like a part 2 and part 3 in June and October. So I'm just excited for like comfort TV, like stuff like that too, kind of coming back. Ah man, other than that, I don't know, man. I haven't really watched anything. I'm still like catching up on stuff. That's another thing. Like I need to see Fallout. I'm tempted to
Me
start The
too.
Boys, but I'm also like I just finished Invincible. I probably need a break, and I need to get back to the Netflix shows of the MCU now that they're like canonized too. So a lot of stuff to be caught up on. I need to get back into anime as well. Just I'm trying not to add shows right now, but the ones that are coming back, I'm definitely watching. So Rings of
Yeah.
Power, Bear, that 90 show, that's probably my summer right there.
Yeah,
And
did Demon
Acolyte,
Slayer
obviously.
Acolyte for sure. Did Demon Slayer season 4/5 start?
I think
Is it
4
season
starts soon. I haven't
it's
seen anything since Mugen Train. After that, I was like, all right, I'll start it soon, season 2, and I just didn't. I need to force myself back onto that schedule.
I'm caught up completely on Demon Slayer. I always get confused because they do technically Mugen Train isn't a season, but it is a season if you want to watch the expanded version.
Yeah.
So it's kind of season 5, but technically season 4 that's coming out. I'm caught up, so I've been waiting to use my a Crunchyroll free trial with one of my emails to watch that. So I was gonna look it up. I knew it was supposed to be sometime in May. Let me look it up for those of you who are Demon Slayer fans. I wouldn't say I'm the world's biggest Demon Slayer fan, but I have a lot of fun watching that show. That is like kind of my enjoyable anime to watch instead of something really dark or depressing or hardcore. May 26th, next weekend, this coming weekend,
Wow.
actually. Pretty exciting. I might actually have to watch that live. First time watching Demon Slayer live. That would be really fun. So, yeah, those would be it for us. Let us know if you guys have something that you think is going to be cool that's coming out this summer. Again, I'm very much so a movie person. I've watched famous shows, shows everybody talks about, but when new shows are coming out, it's not necessarily something that I put on my calendar as much as a new movie that's coming out.
Yeah.
But thank you so much for the question, Colton, and the super chat. No, we and Colton says I always take the convo off Star Wars. Apologize. No, we love that when you do that. Like, and especially in these lives, we usually stick more to Star Wars when we're talking about the Bad Batch or when Acolyte streams come. But we love being taken off topic in these chats. Like I try to remind you guys as often as possible during these streams. Take us off topic. Let's talk about non-Star Wars stuff because we both have so many interests outside of Star Wars. Just Star Wars is our favorite thing, but
Yeah.
it doesn't need to be a Star Wars
Yeah.
only live stream. This is especially in between shows. This is your time to ask us about anything that you want. So we really mean it when it says ask us anything. But thanks so much for the chat. We really appreciate that. And to get back up, I guess we'll go for a little bit longer here. Let's see if we can put a little bit of a dent in some of these chats before we log off. Chris says the golden age of Star Wars gaming had like triple the amount of duds than gems, but we only really remember the gems. LOL. You're right. But it was nice to get a lot of Star Wars games. Back then it was so much cheaper to develop video games, right?
Yeah.
That's one of the reasons we don't get as many is because there's so many video games out there that studios can't really afford to just make a crappy game and put it out and expect people to buy it, especially with everything digital now, with all the competition from indie studios on top of all the AAA studios we have out now. Lucasfilm Games not making their own games. When LucasArts was making their own games, they could just put out as many as they want, right? And it was cheap. Having to license games out, there's not as many people who are going to just take the Star Wars license with like, hey, I'm going to make Super Bombad Racing. That's not really going to happen in today's world. That's something that really only the self-financed Lucas Arts would have done, and in a lot of ways, I miss that. But I do think, in general, the quality of games now are going to be higher. So even if we get something a little smaller or a little like less important, Squadrons is that perfect example. Like where if Squadrons, I feel like people would have loved Squadrons so much more if it came out the same year as Jedi Survivor. Like if it just came out the same year as another big AAA game that we all were excited about, and then you also got this smaller game that was more flight centric, had a small story, but was kind of more of a novelty game that really perfected what it was going for in its novelty, people would remember Squadrons because it'd be like that cherry on top of something else. But when it comes out and you're like waiting 3 years, 4 years for the next Star Wars big AAA game, people kind of forget about it or don't put as much interest in it because it's just kind of it feels like a placeholder. It doesn't feel like as much like a big event like a Star Wars game could be.
Yeah, and what bums me out is that you could very easily just add new maps right now. Like they've got all the ships they need at this point. They could just add new maps, keep it to that same period of time, throw in like a mission for a DLC, and bam, you can keep this game running forever. It's perfected, I think, the Star Wars Flight Simulator. I think this is the best it'll get. Every other game, like the Old Republic and all that, they had their own version. Battlefront did too, but this is so good. So, that's another thing. The games that are good, I hope that they give support for it. If they're not like story based, like the Jedi games, like this is a game that easily could get a second breath of air if they really wanted to. But
Hmm.
right now, all they did is like what bring in one class for Imperial, one class for Rebellion, New Republic, and then the tutorial map, they just made it into a map and they're like, we're done, which sucks. But I'd love for them to just be like, oh, you know what? We'll pick it up. Let's see if there's anyone's interested. And that's a great way to like revitalize games because like why get rid of something like that you can continue to just build off of again and again and again. But maybe they're learning. Maybe they'll start doing that with more newer games.
Travis says, with characters like Kaiza and Momin, I speculate the villain in Acolyte will be the first Ren, his mask being picked up and possessing someone later, as Ren's mask looks like a Sith. I remember mentioning the whip to people a while back. Okay, yeah, you should have put money on that. It would have been a good bet to have, I think, for sure. But yeah, back to Kaizen moment. The whole idea of haunted masks. I mean, haunting has been kind of always the Sith version of Force ghosts.
Yeah.
Where when you become a Force ghost, a light side user becomes one with the Force. The Force accepts them and gives them a physical manifestation. They're able to really truly manifest and become part of the living Force, because the way the light side is so much more a part of the idea of the living Force versus manipulating the Force like the dark side. So we've all the way back to Jedi Academy with Exar Kun, we've had the idea of possession through the dark side. And so I think that's an interesting idea with Ren's mask. It does look very much so like it. And we could see that. However, the only thing I caution with that, Travis, is I like the idea, but if then what does the Acolyte mean? If this is our dark side user, like where are our Sith in this? Are we actually getting any Sith? Because we have these witches, right, who seem to be our main villain faction. But then we have the assassin, who is a former Jedi, who's involved with the witches. Then you have this dark sider, and if he's just Ren, is he a spinoff of the witches? Is he an acolyte, former acolyte of a Sith who spins off and then forms his own group later, and then you attach the Knights of Ren back to the Sith? How does that all work? Because if we do too many dark side factions and never touch Sith, then is this show going to end up being kind of disappointing without any actual like Sith references or Sith reveals during this time? So because of the Knights of the Ren not being Sith, and the fact that Kylo Ren is never Sith, Snoke is never Sith, that is the only thing I worry a little bit if we were to make that connection. I think without this witch cult, if we had Knights of Ren instead of the witch cult and you had Sith, that would be very cool in my opinion too. But I see it being kind of hard to juggle all three factions if you do that. But I would love the homage and the connection to the sequels. Continue to push important things into the sequel era.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, it doesn't have to necessarily become a mask that is pre-haunted, right? You could see it actively then be shaped into a tool that is used by the first like Ren member or something, and it could be a focus of season 2, right? Because this is a show that Headland has been saying like, like it's one season right now, but we really have ideas for season 2. We want characters from the High Republic Initiative we want to bring into. Like this is a great way to explore that, right? Have this be a chance to bring some ideas like we're saying with the sequels, but not make it beholden to all being shoved into one season. It can just be the next thing, these things that are all cropping up more and more that the Jedi think they're putting out or ignoring or hiding, covering up, or someone else is making sure they never like really understand what's happening, right? I think that'd be a great way of handling it. But putting it all in one season, I don't know. I think they Leslie had a specific vision for this first season. Moving forward, they can say like, okay, we have 2 more seasons worth of ideas we want to go into. I don't think this is going to be a show that's like 5 or 6 seasons long. I really doubt that. I don't think it's going to be as connected and like dependent on fleshing out an era as these Mandoverse shows have been. But yes, it's on Tuesday. It'll be at 6 p.m. Pacific Standard Time. That's when the episodes are dropping. That's what we've been confirmed. Not officially yet, but from people in the media and all that. So it seems like we're going back to how things were for Ahsoka. So we will be doing our lives on Tuesdays like we are today, just around the same time once the episode finishes up and we can throw up a thumbnail together. But yeah, make sure to put your market calendars because we're trying to get the same sort of crowd that we had for Ahsoka. It'll be a little busier too, so make sure you send in your super chats if you want for sure to have your questions answered.
Yeah, I would say mark that 7 p.m. time that we've been doing for these streams, and we did for the Bad Batch, and we did for Ahsoka, because that's going to be kind of the time we're going to be looking at with the Acolyte. The rumor about the Acolyte a long time ago. I mean, we won't know it's true until the show comes out, but the rumor was that most of the episodes were between 35 and 40 minutes. So that does mean they'll be done to closer to 6:30 to 6:40 Pacific. So that 7 p.m. Pacific time is most likely a pretty solid, realistic look of when we'll go live. If, all the episodes around 30 minutes, maybe we'll go live a little earlier, but keep that 7 p.m. time in mind. But thanks for the question there, Travis. Chris says it's interesting that Mandalorian season 1, to your guys' point, was loved by so many people who had never seen Star Wars and was totally accessible, while Ahsoka, to me, felt like you needed to have seen everything. Yeah, and that's the big difference, and I think that's something that did turn people off about Ahsoka. I still maintain the fact that there are so many sections of the Star Wars fandom. Maybe it's not great business to make a show that everybody feels like they need to see at least 4 seasons of animated TV to watch. But I love that they did, because the hardcore Star Wars fans, I feel like it's nice to reward us for having watched all this stuff. Like, yeah, it's less accessible. It makes a lot of people feel lost. I know a lot of people were frustrated by that. But for me, I loved that aspect of Ahsoka. That was something I still loved by the time it ended, that it didn't pull too many punches with the idea of like lore being something that you have to know to get into it. It was very Legends-esque in that way, where they might have a couple lines that recap, but it's not going to have a scene that recaps all of Star Wars Rebels. And so for me, that was something that I truly did love about Ahsoka, but it's not great for, the accessibility and marketing of your show. But
Yeah.
Mandalorian season 1, I was honestly shocked how many people like that without having watched anything Star Wars ever, because especially the title, The Mandalorian, is something that people don't know. That in general public, they don't know what a Mandalorian is. They don't know that Boba Fett was and then wasn't and then was again a Mandalorian. They don't know that type of stuff. So I always thought that was kind of a risky title for a Star Wars show, and I really do think it was mostly Grogu that sold it. But it is impressive the way they went with it. It was the most kind of neutral Star Wars thing we had seen in a long time on screen, and something that eventually, people were able to find their way into the lore because of how soft that first season starts.
Yeah, and I mean, Grogu being kept a surprise, a secret for so long, and then
Mhm.
seeing it at the end of that first episode, like nobody thought we had no clue that we're gonna have a baby Yoda. That was such a great surprise, especially in this era of like spoilers and leaks.
Yeah.
To not have like heard anything about that until maybe like half a day before, and people are like, "Nah, what doesn't make any sense?" And then when you see it, you're like, "Oh my god!" Right? And he's adorable, right? That's a huge selling point. It's merchandise galore for him. And then you got to do a knight in shining armor, quite literally. That's the look that he gets once he gets the upgraded set. It's hard not to like have these archetypes, have these thematic choices that are like very easily understandable from just looking at the images on screen for so many people, even if they don't love or know Star Wars. So I understand why it might not have on paper looked like, oh, this is something we can get into, but once you see what's actually there as your leads, you're like, oh yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And then it is early New Republic time, which is as close as you can get to original trilogy without being set in the original trilogy, and the potential like moving forward into that story, and obviously Luke at the end of season 2, right? Like there are these things that we all were playing around in the late 80s and 90s, if you're around then, and especially if you're a kid who grew up in the prequels, you heard about or like played video games set during those periods. We were excited to see this this show this be able to like explore some of those fantasies, right? So I think that was another thing, like so it is like a sandbox in that way.
Yeah.
But Ahsoka, it's harder to get. Again, if it was on Disney Channel, I think people would have remembered it a lot more, because the Clone Wars, the way it's talked about now, people still were able to watch it. It was on Netflix for a while too, so people were like seeing things for the show throughout the time off of TV on Cartoon Network to Netflix, then to Disney Plus. Disney XD, if you didn't have the channel, you didn't know about the show, and it would randomly once in a while put on some episodes on Disney Channel, and it was a replacement for the Clone Wars, which turned off a lot of people. So once they saw this show, and it was, this show was supposedly getting an animated sequel, not a live action sequel for a long time. So yeah, I mean, as I get more and more past that first season, I will say I don't think Ahsoka was the right title with how much the Rebels characters play a part. I think there could
Right.
have been some very interesting titles that you could have played out of it. Um, and Ahsoka could have still been the main lead. I think a lot of the criticism is that it's not always as Ahsoka centric as it should be, other than like the middle of the season. But a easy way, like I said, like you're saying, Liam, it was great. It felt very Legends that you almost had to know this stuff, or at least read through Wikipedia and all that. And as a fan like that, I was like, I'm ready. Like, you don't need to worry about me. I'm finally happy that you're not treating me with like gloves and putting and
Right.
making feeling like everything's gonna shatter as long as you touch me. But I will say I would have almost like a Lord of the Rings esque like prologue, so you could see like what happened with this crew, and then maybe see live action Kanan and everyone younger, and then you set the story here, and then also tie in Ahsoka's story, what's going on. At least some prologue for these guys, right? For the Rebels crew. Ahsoka, I can see the idea of like you want to understand how she left Malachor, how did she make it to this training and all that. But that's another thing. That show doesn't show the thing that separates her and Sabine, which I think is now my biggest frustration. Like you should have at least shown some flashbacks, but they didn't, right? So yeah, it is a show that's very Legends-esque in the best way and the worst way. So, yeah, hopefully season 2 is a little bit clearer about what it's doing now that we've gone past this initial hump, and we get to hopefully flesh out some more of its lore.
A couple more guys, and then we're gonna wrap up around the 2 hour mark here. Nikhil says, "Good evening." Good evening, Nikhil. Travis says, that was in reference to our conversation earlier about the High Republic reading order. Travis also says, "How about the Grand Theft Auto Cloud City game?" In reference to his comment earlier about Star Wars video game genres we haven't seen that we'd like to see explored. That would be funny, play as Lando and Lobot, curb stomping people, shooting people. That would be funny, but would Cloud City be big enough though for an open world Grand Theft Auto style game with characters? Maybe. We'll see. I don't know. But yeah, fun idea. And then Chris says, "How far have you guys played into Star Wars The Old Republic?" I played from 2013 to 2019 or so. The expansion Echoes of Oblivion. It's a decently satisfying conclusion to the overarching KOTOR storyline, in my opinion. I didn't play too long KOTOR. I played it for about a year when it first came out, 2011, I believe. I had it on I had the disc version on my PC, and I played from 2011 probably to 2012. So not much of it, but I kept up with it mostly via, cutscenes and watching like YouTube supercuts, and also reading about the lore. There's so much to consume, so it eventually, when you fall that far behind, it's almost impossible to get back in unless you kind of make it your job, which I would love to do at one point, but I don't know if I could ever catch up on it. But I enjoyed what I had played. I think I would enjoy it a lot more now because I was a lot younger when I started the game. But I did enjoy it even back then. So, but I've always enjoyed what the Old Republic goes for, especially all the different facets of its expansions. Like, I appreciate that its expansions don't necessarily all focus on the same thing. They go in a lot of different directions. Yeah, there's the KOTOR tie-ins. Yeah, there's the KOTOR expansions, but the Eternal Throne and all that type of stuff. The reintroduction of Malgus back in now. I've appreciated that they've tried to keep it a cohesive storyline, but also tried to bring in different elements. It's not just one long running narrative. There are different sets of characters, different playable characters. And ultimately, that's kind of what I like about the legacy of the Old Republic. But yeah, I haven't really touched it in years. So you've definitely played through it much more than I did.
Yeah, I haven't played since Galactic Space Battles kind of became a thing. I
Yeah.
kept up with some of the lore. I will say from what I know of Echoes of Oblivion, it does seem like it's much stronger ending than what Shadows of Revan and everything introduced. That was you have to understand at some point the Revan novel leading into the Revan appearances and the exile experiences in the Old Republic, it was hype in a way, but it was consecutive like negative feelings around how KOTOR was being handled. I know Echoes of Oblivion was actually like the first like true ending, Revan's at peace, all this and that. And that's great. But I do think the years that it took to reach that point, whereas the setup for why they're even in the Old Republic and all that, I never loved it. Like I like the Revan novel in some ways. I don't like it in other ways, and I really don't like the characterization of the exile throughout most of that book and the Old Republic. So more power to you. I'm glad you enjoyed it as an end to the KOTOR story, but for me, an end of a KOTOR story included everything from 1 and 2 set within 10, 15 years max of that storyline. Would have had Bastila, would have had her son, would have seen the next steps of the Jedi after the galaxy is decimated by the Sith Triumvirate, which we never see devastate the galaxy, right? So yeah, I know it's a little bit of nitpicking there, right? I like for me, I had more trouble with that than seeing like the dark saber and how it was handled in Mandalorian. I thought it was silly and dumb in the Mandalorian, but it never like bothered me the way that Revan and Exile were handled between KOTOR 3 cancellation, and then the Old Republic and how it used it for a long time.
Travis says Alien Isolation is a fantastic idea, specifically revisiting a place where a recent film event took place and dealing with its aftermath, like Isolation did with Alien. I think a game set during the Battle of Exegol, with you being a resistance infiltration team taking over a Star Destroyer, fighting off Sith troopers, then crashing and dealing with the Sith acolytes would be cool. That would be pretty
Very cool.
interesting. And
Yeah.
then Travis follows that up with there'd be something scary and atmospheric about being stuck on Exegol, seeing massive air battle overhead with creepy Sith guys coming at you, or Palpatine's lightning shutting power off on your ship. That's a really cool idea. I've never thought about that, but that would be pretty interesting. I would love some more meat to the Battle of Exegol because it is a little too chaotic. Like, it doesn't,
Yeah.
they don't really show much of what happens. There's too many Star Destroyers, too many things going on to where obviously you never feel like they're making a dent in it until they destroy the one thing that causes them to win. So I would love to see ground perspective from that. I don't know if I think in the movies we never actually go to the ground, obviously, because Finn is the ground forces and Janna, and they decide to land on the Star Destroyer instead. So it might conflict with canon a little bit, but I like your idea, and I would love to see a horror game in Star Wars.
Yeah, I mean, I'd love that idea. I love Exegol as a planet. I think it is one of the cooler Sith worlds, including Legends. But you do need to spend time with like some of the creepier elements of it, as opposed to just like, oh, frozen oceans where our Star Destroyers are kept in hangars, right? And everything's in the sky with lightning. As cool as base boosted lightning is, I want to see the source of the base boosted lightning and all the creepy alchemy technology and the, like you said, the acolytes and everything around them.
K-pop Times says, I love the Disney parks too. Are y'all going to D23? I wanted to go to D23 and I couldn't get tickets. I was in those, lines, digital lines that I really can't stand that they do, those virtual lines. I've tried so many times to get like Halloween tickets or even when COVID was restarting to get a ticket to Disneyland. It's so frustrating. So I didn't get a ticket, but I know they did D23 media passes for 2022's D23. We were able to get media passes for Star Wars Celebration in 2022. I want to look in to see if they ever announce media passes for D23 2024. If they do, I would love to be there. I kind of am excited about the way they're doing this year's D23. I think it's a definite step up. Yeah, it does come with a bit more price gouging, but I do like the idea of making the big panels, the big events, like a nighttime show thing. And even though I don't know why they've moved it all the way over to the Honda Center, because that's going to be kind of a pain because you're gonna have to pay for parking at the convention center and then you have to drive over there and pay for parking again. I guess you could Uber, but yeah, that's kind of frustrating, but it does allow you to actually enjoy the convention. So I do like what they've done with it, but not going as of now. Travis says, this will be our last one, guys. Unfortunately, we've reached about 2 hours, so we're going to have to wrap it up. But we appreciate all of you for sending your questions. And come back next week, Tuesday, 7 p.m. We will be here, and it is Ask Us Anything. You can talk about anything you want. As Colton and K-Pop Times have also said, enjoyed the off-topic conversations here, and we definitely do too. So come back with any questions you have, and especially if there's no Star Wars news at all, it will be just your guys' questions that keeps the show going. So come back with us next week. And the last question we'll talk about here is Travis says, the only thing I personally didn't like about theme parks was the concept of canon books made to promote them, like Black Spire. And yeah, that was the books. So I have not read Galaxy's Edge Black Spire yet. I do really like Phasma, and I have the audiobook for Black Spider and just haven't listened to it. Also have the book. So one day I'll eventually read it because I did enjoy Phasma, and after Inquisitor, Rise of the Red Blade was really reminded about how great Delilah S. Dawson's work is, and very underrated amongst canon authors. But the comic series was ultra disappointing, very shallow, and I never really heard anything good about the young adult book. I'm blanking on its name. But
yeah, just look back.
Crash of Fate.
Crash of Fate.
I never really heard great things about it. Still haven't read that one. So I think the marketing around it was kind of underwhelming. But I do love that it is a point in time in Star Wars history. Like I think Batuu, the idea of Batuu is very cool because it's the whole idea was a living, breathing planet that you feel like you're in Star Wars instead of recreating a scene from Star Wars like they've done with a lot of lands in the past. Whether it's sort of like the Frozen land they've been making where you're recreating Arendelle, or some of the other lands they made in the past where you've recreated parts of the movie. The idea of this was it was always evolving, always changing, it had a history. And I think that was something really cool they added to Star Wars by doing this land. Again, I wouldn't have made it set in a specific time period. And if you did, I would have set it in the original trilogy because that's kind of the most evergreen period of Star Wars. But I do think the land definitely has lived up to the hype. It's just now in kind of a weird place because of the controversy around the sequel trilogy. The fact that when we get back into these sequel characters, we're jumping 15 years later, so it won't even be the same time period as this. It's set in a 1-year gap that has not been explored really at all. And ultimately, it kind of feels like it's put in a forgotten piece of Star Wars, or a piece of Star Wars that doesn't really matter. I think to elevate it, strip the sequel theming and just say it's a part of all eras of Star Wars. Remove any iconography from any specific eras and have Darth Vader walking around, have stormtroopers walking around, have Boba Fett, have Obi-Wan in certain areas. People don't really, as much as we're canon fans, we don't like to see things contradicted. That's the least of my worries, is the theme park land. So if they do all that and truly make it feel like the ultimate Star Wars destination, while also being a living, breathing place that you can read about and see in other material, I think that would be the ultimate use for Batu and Galaxy's Edge.
Can't add anything better to that. I did hear though that the Black Spire novel is almost like a sequel to Phasma, so
Yeah.
yeah, definitely need to read those back to back for sure.
Well, that's going to wrap it up for today. Everybody, thank you so much for joining us. A little longer stream, but we got so many great questions and so much great conversation going on here that we always appreciate you guys sending it in. So we decided to give you a little longer stream today. So hopefully you enjoyed that. If you're watching on replay, every Tuesday, make sure you join us. So next week, it will be the 28th, May 28th, 7 p.m. Pacific. We go live. We discuss the latest Star Wars news and we take all of your questions. It does not have to be about Star Wars. Your questions, you send in any questions you want. Support the channel. And just talk with us. It's your time to hear our thoughts on a variety of topics. So hopefully you guys join us if you're new to this stream or if you're watching on replay and just finding this for the first time. So hopefully we see you next week for the latest and greatest in the world of Star Wars news. There will be one more of these before we eventually get into Acolyte, and then this show will shift into the Acolyte reaction show. It will mostly only be focused on Acolyte, with the occasional answering of questions if we get through all the Acolyte topics, but mostly focused on Acolyte. If there are big Star Wars news topics, like I said at the beginning of the stream, we will do other streams for those. But the Tuesday show specifically will be Acolyte focused. Stay tuned. We have a lot of other great content coming out. If you haven't been around the channel recently, we're still doing shorts every other day. We also have polls up on the community section where you can vote for your favorite Star Wars characters of all time. Putting an update up tomorrow because we've gotten through almost every character's played at least 3 matches. So putting a little update for who's in the lead tomorrow. You can check that out. And then we had a lot of great content come out last week. If you're interested in videos, we did have a video tier list where we ranked every era of Star Wars. You can check that out on the channel. A lot of people seem to be enjoying that topic. And then I put out my pitch that I've talked about a lot here on the live streams about what the next animated Star Wars show should be and why I think it should be a Dark Times anthology series. So you can check that out on the channel. Both of those videos are up. I'm currently working on and in the process of editing. Should be up tomorrow or Thursday at the latest, the Star Wars Legends timeline first part, which will cover the Dawn of the Jedi era and the Old Republic era. We had a lot of Old Republic conversation tonight. So if you're interested in seeing how you should read, watch, and play everything in the Old Republic, definitely check out that video. It will be the first of 8 parts of my Star Wars Legends timeline breakdown where I show you everything that you can watch, read, and play. So if you're interested in Star Wars Legends or getting into the Star Wars timeline from the expanded universe, definitely check that series out. We'll have a lot of other great videos for you throughout the rest of the week and into next week as we build our way towards the Acolyte. Only 2 weeks exactly from today before the Acolyte is out. So hopefully you guys are all enjoying the content on the channel, enjoying these conversations and all of our talks here. And we appreciate all of you guys for joining and contributing to the conversation every single week. Thank you so much to everybody for watching, and we will see you all next week. Good night, everybody.